Sleep on the couch, my boyfriend said. So his ex could have my bed. Then tried to kick me out of my own house. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 33 and I manage regional operations for a logistics company in Columbus. 4 years ago, after nearly a decade of chasing promotions, I bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. It isn't luxurious, but every payment, from the mortgage to the utilities and property taxes, comes from my account. That detail matters because everything that happened afterwards started with one simple fact. It was my home long before anyone else lived there. My boyfriend, Ethan Carter, moved in 8 months ago after his apartment lease ended. We'd been together for just over 2 years, and although we split groceries and everyday expenses, I never expected him to help pay the mortgage. I wanted us to build a life together, not argue over ownership. At the time, I believed we had a solid relationship. Ethan was funny, outgoing, and effortlessly charming, but looking back, I can see the warning signs I'd dismissed. He had a habit of making plans before asking me, announcing decisions instead of discussing them, and treating my opinion like an afterthought. Each incident seemed too small to start a fight over, so I let it go. I didn't realize those little compromises were slowly becoming a pattern. Everything finally came to a head on a Friday afternoon while I was wrapping up a conference call at work. My phone lit up with Ethan's name, and I answered with a smile that disappeared almost as soon as I heard his voice. Just letting you know, Olivia's coming over tonight. Olivia, his ex-girlfriend. I frowned. Why? She had a fight with her roommate and needs somewhere to stay for a few days. I leaned back in my chair, assuming he'd already arranged something reasonable. Maybe she'd take the couch, or maybe he'd booked the same hotel my parents stayed in when they visited. Where's she sleeping? I asked. There was a brief pause before he answered, as casually as if he were talking about the weather. Our bedroom. I blinked, convinced I'd misheard him. I'm sorry. Our room, he repeated patiently. She'll be more comfortable there. I waited for him to laugh to admit he was joking, but he never did. So where exactly am I supposed to sleep? His answer came without the slightest hesitation. My ex-girlfriend is coming over, so you can take the couch. There was no, would you mind? No, can we figure something out? Not even I know this is asking a lot. He wasn't asking for my opinion. He'd already made the decision and expected me to accept it. I sat there in silence for a moment before taking a slow breath. We'll talk when I get home. Then I hung up. The drive home felt unusually quiet. Normally I would have replayed the conversation, searching for another explanation, but this time I knew exactly what he'd said. What I couldn't understand was why he believed he had the right to say it. When I walked through the front door, Ethan was in the kitchen making dinner. He glanced up and smiled as if nothing had happened. There you are. I set my bag down. We need to talk. His smile barely changed. It's really not that big a deal. It became a big deal the second you decided where I'd be sleeping. He sighed and leaned against the counter. Claire, you're making this awkward. Olivia's basically family. She's your ex. That doesn't matter. It matters to me. His shoulders shifted uneasily, already sounding impatient. You're overthinking this. I held his gaze. If my ex-boyfriend called tonight, would you be fine sleeping on the couch while he shared our bed with me? That's different. I'd expected that answer. Different how? He rolled his eyes. Because it just is. Olivia isn't going to make anything weird. I didn't ask what Olivia would do, I said. I asked how you'd feel. His eyes drifted toward the floor before he let out a quiet laugh. I think you're being insecure. The word landed harder than I expected, not because it hurt, but because it made one thing painfully clear. Ethan had already decided this conversation was no longer about respect. In his mind, the real problem was my reaction. I don't think wanting to sleep in my own bedroom makes me insecure. It isn't just your bedroom. My gaze drifted across the kitchen, taking in the cabinets I'd chosen, the light fixtures I'd installed, and the walls I'd spent weekends painting before meeting him. It actually is. His face tightened. You don't have to pull the homeowner card. I'm not. I'm reminding you of something you seem to have forgotten. I've never once made you feel like this wasn't your home, but today you made it very clear whose comfort mattered more. I exhaled through his nose. It'll only be a couple of nights. Then Olivia can sleep on the couch. She has back problems. So do hotels. They have beds too. He stared at me for a moment before shaking his head. You know she can't afford one. Then maybe another friend can help. I already told her she could stay here. I nodded slowly. There it is. What? You promised her something that was never yours to promise. Neither of us spoke as we stood staring at each other. Finally, Ethan folded his arms and said, I already told Olivia everything was taken care of. You told her wrong. Before either of us could say another word, the doorbell rang. Neither of us moved at first. Ethan glanced toward the front door, then looked back at me. She's here. My eyes followed his to the hallway. In that moment, I realized this wasn't really about Olivia. It was about whether I would quietly give up my place in my own home just to keep the peace. A second later, I opened the door. Olivia stood on the porch with a navy duffel bag slung over one shoulder. She couldn't have been much older than 30, dressed in leggings, white sneakers, and an oversized sweater that managed to look effortlessly expensive. Her blonde hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and she smiled the moment she saw me. "You must be Claire." "I am." She offered her hand. "Thanks for letting me stay." I shook it politely. "We haven't actually settled that yet." Her smile faltered. Behind her, Ethan let out a nervous chuckle. "Claire's kidding." "I wasn't," I replied. Olivia's eyes moved between us, suddenly unsure whether she'd stepped into the middle of an argument. "I wasn't trying to cause any problems." "I don't think you were," I said honestly. "I think you were invited into one." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Ethan stepped forward before she could respond. "Can we not do this in the doorway?" I closed the front door behind them. "We can absolutely do it here." He closed his eyes for a second. "Claire!" I cut him off and looked at Olivia instead. "If you need somewhere to stay tonight, you're welcome to use the couch." Before she could answer, Ethan spoke. "She isn't sleeping on the couch." I turned to him. "Excuse me?" "Her back's been bothering her." Olivia gave an apologetic shrug. "I heard it lifting weights a while back." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "I just don't understand why that means I have to give up my own bedroom." His patience was clearly running out. "You're acting like this is some huge sacrifice." "It is. It's one bed. It's one boundary," I corrected. "There's a difference." He let out a quiet laugh. "You always turn everything into a matter of principle. And you keep making decisions that aren't yours to make." Olivia shifted uncomfortably. "I can sleep on the couch if that's easier." For a brief moment, I thought the conversation might finally end there. Instead, Ethan shook his head. "No, absolutely not." He met my eyes. "You're the one making this difficult. So your solution is still that I give up my room?" "It's only temporary." "How temporary?" I hesitated before answering. "A few days? Maybe a week," Olivia admitted quietly. I turned to Ethan. "A week?" He avoided my eyes. "We'll see how things go." That was all I needed to hear. They had already discussed how long she'd stay, where she'd sleep, and what the arrangement would be. The only person left out of those conversations was the one who actually owned the house. A strange calm settled over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply clear about what was happening. "When were you planning to tell me Olivia might be here for a week?" "I just did." "No," I said. "You informed me. You never asked." He threw up his hands. "Why does everything have to be a negotiation?" "Because healthy relationships involve two people." He glanced at Olivia, hoping she'd back him up, but she only looked at him uncertainly. "Ethan, are you sure this is okay?" "It'll be fine." "No," I said, before he could continue. "It won't." The room went still except for the low hum of the refrigerator. "Olivia, this isn't personal. I believe you needed somewhere safe to stay." She nodded. "I did. But Ethan offered you something that wasn't his to offer." She turned toward him while he folded his arms. "You're embarrassing me." I gave a small shake of my head. "No, I'm correcting you." His expression hardened. "So what now?" "Now she sleeps on the couch tonight, and tomorrow she finds somewhere else to stay." Hein took a slow step toward me. "You don't get to make that decision by yourself." I held his gaze. "In this house, I actually do." His jaw tightened. "You seriously need to stop acting like you own everything." I glanced around the living room, taking in the hardwood floors I'd chosen, the bookshelves my father and I built together, and the framed photographs I'd hung long before Ethan moved in. "I don't act like I own it," I said calmly. "I own it." The words weren't meant to hurt him. They were simply the truth. The warmth disappeared from his face. "So this is really who you are?" "No," I replied evenly. "This is who I've always been. I just never imagined I'd have to defend my right to sleep in my own bedroom." Olivia lowered her eyes. "I think maybe I should leave." "You're not going anywhere," Ethan said immediately, turning back to me. "If you can't support me when someone important to me needs help." He paused just long enough for the words to sink in. "Maybe you should leave for the night." The room fell silent. Olivia turned to him in disbelief. "What?" Even she sounded stunned. I held his gaze. "You want me to leave my own house?" "You know that's not what I meant." "Then tell me what you did mean." He couldn't, because we all understood exactly what those words meant. In that moment, everything became painfully clear. This had never been about Olivia needing a place to stay. It was a test, a quiet assumption that I'd give up my comfort, my space, and eventually my place in my own home just to avoid an argument. Every small compromise I'd made over the past 8 months suddenly fit together, and tonight was simply the biggest one. Unlike the others, this one wasn't going to happen. I walked past them, opened the front door, and looked first at Olivia, then at Ethan. "You both need to leave." Neither of them moved. Olivia turned toward Ethan, waiting for him to fix a situation that had unraveled far faster than she'd expected, but he only stared at me. "You can't be serious." I've never been more serious. He let out a short, disbelieving laugh. So you're throwing away 2 years because Olivia needs somewhere to sleep? I shook my head. I'm ending this because you decided my opinion didn't matter inside my own home. He stepped toward me. Claire! I raised a hand before he could come any closer. You didn't ask. You informed me. You offered up my bedroom, then told me to leave. Each sentence stripped away another excuse. For the first time that evening, Ethan had no answer. Ethan, Olivia said quietly. Han ignored her. We can still fix this. I studied him for a moment. Can we? His shoulders eased slightly, as if he thought I changed my mind. You know I didn't mean it like that. Then how did you mean it? Neither of us rushed to fill the gap. I just wanted everyone to be comfortable. I nodded. And somehow I was the only person expected to be uncomfortable. He opened his mouth, then stopped. There wasn't another explanation because there had never been one. Olivia adjusted the strap of her duffel bag. I really don't want to come between you two. Looking at her now, she seemed less like someone trying to take my place, and more like someone who'd been told a carefully edited version of the story. I know, I said. This isn't your fault, but Ethan offered you something that wasn't his to offer. She gave a small nod. I understand, but I still can't stay. No, I said gently. You can't. Ethan exhaled sharply. So that's it? That's it. You'd really throw us both out. I met his eyes. I'm not throwing you out. I'm ending our relationship. The words seemed to drain the room of sound. Even Olivia looked stunned. What? We're done. He stared at me as though he couldn't process what he'd heard. You're overreacting. I don't think so. This isn't one argument. It's a pattern I've ignored for far too long. What pattern? The plans you made without me, the decisions you announced instead of discussing, and every time you brushed aside my concerns because keeping someone else happy mattered more. I took a steady breath. Tonight wasn't the first time. It was simply the first time you stopped pretending to ask. He shook his head. You're rewriting history. No, I'm finally seeing it clearly. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could almost see him searching for the version of me who always chose compromise. She wasn't standing there anymore. His tone changed. So what am I supposed to do now? Pack your things. Tonight? Tonight. You expect me to leave immediately. I expect you to respect the same boundary you expected me to give up. His jaw tightened. You'd really choose a house over me? I almost smiled. This was never about the house. It was about respect. And respect is one of the ways people show love. Olivia cleared her throat softly. Ethan. He never looked at her. Instead, he kept staring at me. You're making a mistake. Maybe, I said. But it'll be my mistake. Something shifted in his expression. Until then, he'd believed he could still change my mind. Now he finally understood the decision had already been made. So after everything I've done for us, I cut him off. You lived here because I welcomed you. I built a life with you, and tonight you repaid that by deciding I no longer belonged in my own bedroom. His gaze dropped first. That tiny movement told me more than any apology ever could. Olivia quietly picked up her duffel bag. I think we should go. Ethan said nothing. She walked toward the open door and paused on the porch just long enough to look back at me. I'm sorry. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was simply the apology of someone who had walked into a situation she never fully understood, and I appreciated the difference before she stepped outside. Ethan didn't move. You'll regret this. I held his gaze, expecting to feel angry or heartbroken. Instead, what surprised me most was the sense of relief settling over me. No, I said quietly. I think I'd regret staying. Those words seemed to hit him harder than anything else I'd said. Without another argument, he picked up the overnight bag he'd left in the hallway and walked toward the door. Before following Olivia down the front walkway, he stopped and looked back one last time. So you really mean this? I do. He lingered for a few seconds, as if waiting for me to change my mind, cry, or run after him. I simply held the door open. Eventually he turned away. I watched them reach Olivia's car and drive off without looking back. When the taillights disappeared around the corner, I closed the front door and slid the deadbolt into place. The quiet click echoed through the house, and for the first time that evening, I could finally breathe. But I wasn't finished. Over the years, I'd learned that boundaries only matter if you're willing to protect them. I walked to the hallway closet, collected every spare key I knew about, and lined them up on the kitchen counter. Then I opened the garage door app and removed Ethan's access, disabled the keypad code he'd been using for months, and deleted his profile from the home security system. Each confirmation appeared within seconds. Within seconds, the notifications confirmed that Ethan's access, garage code, and security profile had all been removed. Only then did I search for a locksmith. The earliest appointment was 8 o'clock the next morning, and I booked it without a second thought. It wasn't revenge. It was prevention. 23 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Ethan, you're seriously overreacting. I read the message once and set my phone face down. An hour later, another arrived. Ethan, Olivia thinks you embarrassed yourself tonight. I ignored that one too. Just before midnight, a final text appeared. Can we please talk? I looked down the hallway toward my bedroom. My bedroom. For the first time in months, I walked into my bedroom without another argument waiting for me. I locked my phone, turned off the lights, and went upstairs. For the first time in 8 months, I slept peacefully in my own bed. The next morning, I woke up at 6:10 without an alarm. For a few quiet seconds, everything felt normal, until I noticed the empty section of the closet where Ethan's clothes had been. The room didn't feel lonely anymore. If anything, it felt lighter. I reached for my phone. 9 unread messages waited for me. Every one from Ethan. The first had arrived less than 20 minutes after he walked out the door. 3 more messages followed, each blaming my reaction instead of what he'd done. A little after 1:30 in the morning, the anger softened. Please, just answer me. The final message came at 2:07. I love you. Don't make a decision you'll regret. I read every text from beginning to end. Reading the messages, I noticed something far more revealing than the words themselves. Not once did he apologize for asking me to leave my own bedroom. Not one admission that he'd crossed a line. Every message blamed my pride, my ego, or my reaction, as though the problem had started when I refused instead of when he decided my place in the house was negotiable. I set my phone aside, brewed a cup of coffee, and watched the first light spread across the backyard. The silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt deserved. After breakfast, I blocked his number. I blocked him everywhere. Instagram, Facebook, Messenger, even LinkedIn. One by one, every door he could use to restart the same argument disappeared. It wasn't revenge. I was simply refusing to have the same conversation twice. 20 minutes later, an unknown number called. I ignored it. A voicemail appeared a minute later. Curiosity 1. Claire. His voice sounded tired. Blocking me is childish. We're adults. Adults talk things through. After 2 years, you owe me that. I deleted the message before it even finished playing and blocked that number too. At exactly 8 o'clock, the locksmith arrived. While he replaced the front and back locks, I gathered every spare key, reset the garage opener, changed the keypad code, and removed every remaining way Ethan could enter the house. As he packed up his tools, he smiled. Recent breakup? You could say that. He chuckled. I've changed locks after more breakups than I can count. I'm hoping this is the last time I'll ever need to. I hope so too. He climbed into his van and drove away. Just before noon, the doorbell rang. Instead of walking to the front door, I opened the security camera on my phone. Ethan stood on the porch alone. The confidence he'd worn the night before was gone. His shoulders sagged, and even through the camera he looked exhausted. I pressed the intercom. What do you need? So this is how we're doing this? If you're here for your belongings, come back tomorrow between 10 and noon. Everything will be packed. He frowned. You're seriously talking to me through a camera? I'm respecting a boundary you refuse to respect. He rubbed his face. Claire, just open the door. No, we can fix this. I don't believe we can. He stayed on the porch for nearly a minute. A few months earlier, that silence would have been enough to make me unlock the door. This time, I simply waited. Eventually, he shook his head. I don't even recognize you anymore. I smiled faintly. I finally do. Hayne had nothing left to say. He turned around, climbed back into his car, and drove away. Watching him disappear, I realized blocking him hadn't been an act of anger. It had been the first peaceful decision I'd made in months. The rest of Saturday passed quietly. I bought moving boxes, packing tape, and bubble wrap, then spent the afternoon packing everything Ethan owned. I folded every shirt, paired every shoe, wrapped every framed photo, and separated his work clothes from everything else. If someone had walked into the garage, they would have assumed I was helping a friend move instead of ending a relationship. Around 10:40, another unknown number texted. I'm outside. The security camera showed a silver SUV parked at the curb. Ethan climbed out of the passenger seat. Olivia was behind the wheel, so she'd come after all. I opened only the garage door. His boxes were already stacked neatly inside. Stepping into the driveway, I kept my distance. Everything that's yours is here. If I missed anything, send the list through someone else and I'll arrange another pickup. His eyes drifted over the boxes before settling on me. You packed everything. I did. I thought. He stopped himself. I thought you'd be angrier. I almost smiled. Anger makes people reckless. What I'm feeling now doesn't. I rubbed the back of his neck. I'm here to explain. You already had that chance. I was under a lot of pressure. From who? I glanced toward the SUV. Olivia needed help. I followed his gaze. Olivia was staring through the windshield, deliberately pretending not to hear us. Helping someone, I said, never required asking me to give up my own home. His shoulders dropped. You could have supported me for one night. Support doesn't require displacement. He simply picked up the box. He bent down, lifted the first box, and carried it to the SUV, while I stayed exactly where I was, quietly watching him pack up the life he'd assumed would always be waiting for him. A few seconds later, Olivia climbed out of the SUV and walked toward the garage. I can help. You don't have to. I know. Even so, she bent down, lifted another box, and paused before turning away. I'm sorry this ended up happening. There was no defensiveness in her voice, only genuine discomfort. I believe you, I said. She gave a quiet nod and carried the box back to the SUV. When Ethan returned, the confidence he'd worn the night before had disappeared. Dark circles framed his eyes and he looked like someone who hadn't slept. I barely got any rest. I did. He let out a tired breath and looked away. I've been thinking about last night. So have I. Probably for very different reasons. I never wanted this. I folded my arms. Then what exactly did you want? I wanted everyone to get along. You wanted everyone comfortable, I said, glancing toward Olivia. Except the one person expected to give something up. He let out a slow breath. I wasn't thinking. I know. I looked up, surprised. You do? You weren't thinking about me. He dragged a tired hand down his face. I guess I handled it badly. I waited for the apology that never came. He never said he'd been wrong for telling me to leave my own bedroom. He never admitted he'd crossed a line. Instead, he moved on. You know, Olivia's apartment situation was a mess. I do. And she didn't have anyone else. I held his gaze. Then why wasn't the couch enough? He opened his mouth, searching for an answer that never arrived. By then, Olivia had returned with another box. She glanced between us before quietly asking, Ethan, Han ignored her. You could have trusted me. I did, for 2 years. And last night showed me exactly what trusting you looked like. His jaw tightened. You're making me sound like a villain. I don't think you're a villain. I think you made a choice, and now you're living with the consequences. Olivia stopped where she was instead of carrying the next box away. You told me Claire was uncomfortable with me staying. She was. She slowly shook her head. No, that's not what happened. Neither of us interrupted. You never told me you asked her to give up her bedroom. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He hesitated. The silence answered before he could. Olivia turned back to me. Did he really ask you to sleep somewhere else? Yes. In your own house? Yes. She stared at Ethan. I thought the room had already been offered. It had, I said quietly. It just wasn't his room to offer. She slowly lowered the box she'd been carrying. You left that part out. I didn't think it mattered. A short, disbelieving laugh escaped her. It mattered. I was trying to help you. I know, she replied. But you solved my problem by creating one for someone else. Frustration crept into Ethan's voice. So whose side are you on? This isn't about sides, Olivia said. It's about what actually happened. For the first time since arriving, she looked embarrassed for him rather than because of him. She faced me again. I owe you an apology. You don't. I accepted something that should have been discussed with you first. If I'd known the whole story, I would have booked a hotel. That sentence hit Ethan harder than anything I'd said. So now you're blaming me? I'm saying you didn't tell me the truth. I simplified it. No, she said quietly. You changed it. No one spoke for several seconds. Eventually, Ethan lifted the last box. I guess everyone thinks I'm wrong. I shook my head. No, everyone finally knows the same facts. He carried the box to the SUV without another word. While he loaded the trunk, Olivia stayed behind. I'm sorry. I know. I wish I'd understood before I came. So do I. She offered one last apologetic smile before walking back to the driveway. After closing the trunk, Ethan came toward me one final time. So this is really over. It was over the moment you decided you could choose where I slept. You'll regret walking away. I met his eyes. I didn't walk away. You asked me to. He searched my face for hesitation and found none. After a long moment, he gave a single nod, turned around and climbed into the passenger seat. Before driving away, Olivia looked back at the house. Our eyes met briefly. There was no resentment between us anymore, only the uncomfortable understanding of two people who had been given very different versions of the same story. I watched the SUV disappear at the end of the street, then lowered the garage door. As it closed, the afternoon light narrowed to a thin strip before disappearing completely. The house was quiet again. This time, the quiet felt final. 3 months later, life had settled into a rhythm that no longer felt strange. I rearranged the bedroom, moved the dresser beneath the window, bought new bedding, and finally painted the accent wall I'd been putting off for years. None of it was meant to make a statement. I simply wanted the room to feel like mine again. Friends eventually asked what had happened. I never gave them the dramatic version. I always told the same story. My boyfriend told me to sleep on the couch in my own house so his ex-girlfriend could have our bed. The reaction was always identical. In your house? Yes, That single detail answered every question before anyone had to ask another. With enough distance, I finally understood that the bedroom hadn't ended our relationship. It had exposed one that had already been wearing thin. Looking back, I could see every decision he'd announced instead of discussing, every small correction in front of friends, and every time my opinion became optional because avoiding conflict seemed easier than speaking up. About 6 weeks after the breakup, a mutual friend called. I probably shouldn't tell you this. You probably shouldn't, I said with a laugh. But you're going to. She laughed too. Ethan's been asking about you. He keeps telling people he made one stupid mistake. It wasn't one mistake. I know. He also says he hopes you'll meet him halfway someday. I looked across the backyard before answering. Halfway only works when both people started walking toward each other. She didn't have anything to say after that. Before hanging up, she hesitated before saying quietly, "For what it's worth, I don't think anyone blames you." I smiled faintly. I wasn't looking for anyone too. A few weeks later, I stopped at a neighborhood coffee shop before running errands. As I waited for my order, someone called my name. Claire. I turned to see Olivia standing behind me with a coffee in one hand. Surprise flashed across her face. So this really is a coincidence. I guess it is. The first few seconds were awkward, but she broke the silence. I've been hoping I'd run into you someday. I wanted to apologize again. You already apologized. I know, she said. But after everything settled down, I realized how unfair the whole situation really was. I thanked her, expecting the conversation to end there, but she took another sip of coffee before continuing. I found out later Ethan wasn't telling people what actually happened. He kept saying you were jealous of me. I couldn't help laughing. I suppose that's easier than admitting the truth. It was, she agreed. The problem was that once a few mutual friends heard the full story, nobody reacted the way he expected. She looked genuinely uncomfortable. If I'd known he'd asked you to give up your own bedroom, I never would have stayed. I would have booked a hotel or slept on someone's couch. I believe you. The relief that crossed her face told me she'd been carrying that guilt for weeks. We ended up talking for another 10 minutes, but Ethan barely came up again. Instead, we drifted into ordinary conversation about work, travel, and books we'd both enjoyed. By the time we finished our coffee, she felt less like my boyfriend's ex and more like someone who had been caught in the middle of someone else's bad decision. As we walked outside, she smiled. I hope life's treating you well. It is. I'm glad. So am I. We headed in opposite directions without the weight that had followed us the first time we'd met. About a month later, I saw Ethan for the last time. I had just finished meeting a client when he opened the coffee shop door and nearly walked into me. We both stopped. Not older, not thinner, just quieter. The confidence that once made every decision sound obvious had been replaced by something much more cautious. Hi, Claire. Hi. He hesitated before speaking. I've replayed that night more times than I can count. I imagine you have. I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I appreciate you saying it. He nodded, then asked the question he'd obviously been carrying. Do you still think I was wrong? Instead of answering directly, I asked the question I'd wanted him to answer from the beginning. If someone told you to sleep on the couch in your own house so another woman could have your bed, what would you do? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes dropped to the sidewalk before he let out a slow breath. I wouldn't accept it. No, I said quietly. I don't think you would. A tired smile crossed his face. I finally understand. I think you do. Neither of us tried to revisit the past. There was nothing left to defend, nothing left to explain, and nothing left to repair. He stepped aside to let me pass. I hope you're happy. I am. I'm still figuring that part out. I hope you do. I will. This time, I believed him. As I walked toward my car, I realized the anger had disappeared long ago. What remained wasn't satisfaction or regret, just the quiet certainty that I'd made the right decision. A few people have asked whether our relationship really ended over a couch. I always give them the same answer. It ended the moment one person believed he could make decisions that belonged to both of us. Every evening I unlock the front door, climb the stairs, and fall asleep in my own bed. The room is quiet now, but for the first time in a long while, it finally feels like home again.